Weston's From Ritual to Romance. Continuing Chapter 11, The Secret of the Grail. 2. The Naassene Document. Christianity, originally an Eastern, became a Western religion. The mystery elements were frowned upon. Kinship with pre-Christian faiths ignored or denied, where the resemblances between the cults proved too striking for either of these methods. Such resemblances were boldly attributed to the invention of the father of lies himself, a cunning snare whereby to deceive unwary souls. Christianity was carefully trimmed, shaped, and forced into an orthodox mold, and anything that refused to adapt itself to this drastic process became, by that very refusal, anathema to the righteous, or those who called themselves righteous. There's a difference between belief and righteousness, right? Small wonder that under such conditions, the early ages of the church were marked by a fruitful crop of heresies, people forming opinions. And heresy hunting became an intellectual pastime in high favor among strictly orthodox. Well, the point of the heresy is to be orthodox, so. Among the writers of this period, whose works have been preserved, Hippolytus, Bishop of Portus, in the early years of the 3rd century of the Common Era, was one of the most industrious. He compiled a voluminous treatise entitled Philosophemina, or the refutation of all heresies, which only one manuscript, and that of the 14th century, has descended to us. The work was already partially known by quotations. The first book had been attributed to Origen and published in the Editio Princeps of his works. The text originally consisted of 10 books, but of these, the first 3 and part of the 4th are missing from the manuscript. The Origen text supplies part of the lacuna, but 2 entire books and part of a 3rd are missing. Now, these special books, we learn from the introduction, dealt with the doctrines and mysteries of the Egyptians and Chaldeans, whose most sacred secrets Hippolytus boasts that he has divulged. Curiously enough, not only are these books lacking, but in the epitome at the beginning of the book, X, the summary of their contents is also missing, a significant detail which has been suggested by critics. Looks like a deliberate attempt on the part of some copyist to suppress the information contained in the books in question. Incidentally, this would seem to suggest that the worthy bishop was not making an empty boast when he claimed to be a revealer of secrets. But what is of special interest to us is the treatment meted out to the Christian mystics, whom Hippolytus stigmatizes as heresies, and whose teaching he deliberately asserts to be simply that of pagan mysteries. I don't think that a person should use words like pagan and barbarian and heathen and infidels. Oh, they believe something different. That's just not right. He had come into possession of a secret document belonging to one of these sects, whom he calls Naassenes. This document he gives in full, and it certainly throws a most extraordinary light upon the relation which this early Christian sect held to exist between the new and the old faith. Mr. G.R.S. Mead, in his translation of the Hermetic writings, entitled Thrice Greatest Hermes, has given a careful translation and detailed analysis of this most important text, and it is from his work that I shall quote. So far as the structure of the document is concerned, Mr. Mead distinguishes 3 stages. My stomach's grumbling a lot today. An original, so-called pagan source, probably dating from the first half of the 1st century BCE, but containing material of earlier date. The working over of this source by a Jewish mystic, whom the critics holds to have been a contemporary of Philo. Now we see that the Testament of Solomon is a reworking of a lot of mythology and lies about Solomon, and then the Christians got a hold of that and turned it into a magical tradition that proves that it couldn't start, with details in it that proves that it couldn't have started even with the Jewish sources that we found. A subsequent working over with additions by a Christian Gnostic, Naassene, in the middle of the 2nd century of the Common Era. Finally, the text was edited by Hippolytus in the Refutation about 222 AD, which is not going to go up till the 22nd of the 2nd month, but I do intend to have my 222 video out soon enough. The ground covered is roughly from 50 BCE to 220 of the Common Era. In the translation given by Mr. Mead, these successive layers are distinguished by initial letters and difference of type, but these distinctions are not of importance for us. What we desire to know is what was really held and taught by these mystics of the early church. Mr. Mead, in his introductory remarks, summarizes the evidence as follows. The claim of these Gnostics was practically that of Christianity, or rather the good news of the Christ. After this, I'm going to eat. Was precisely the consummation of the inner doctrine of the mystery institutions of all the nations. The end of them all was the revelation of the mystery of man. In other words, the teaching of these Naassenes was practically a synthesis of all the mystery religions, and although Hippolytus regards them as nothing more than devotees of the cult of the Magna Mater, we shall see that, while their doctrine and teaching were undoubtedly based mainly upon the doctrine and practices of the Phrygian mysteries, they practically identified the entity therein worshipped, Attis, with the presiding entity of all the other mysteries. See, another way that Christianity is not unique. Mr. Mead draws attention to the fact that Hippolytus places these Naassenes in the forefront of his refutation. They are the first group of heretics with whom he deals, and may therefore conclude that he considered them, if not the most important, at least the oldest, of such sectaries. Now, I've talked about this in my comments on the ISKCON movement, was that it's not that people don't have opinions, it's that people's opinions are supposed to be moved in a particular direction, right? With these prefatory remarks, it will be well to let the document speak for itself. It is of considerable length, and, as we have seen, of intricate construction. I shall therefore quote only those sections which bear directly upon the subject of our investigation. Any reader desirous of fuller information can refer to Mr. Meade's work or to the original text published by Reitzenstein. At the outset, it will be well to understand that the central doctrine of all these mysteries is what Reitzenstein sums up as the doctrine of man, the heavenly man, the so-called Son of God, who descends and becomes a slave of the fate sphere, and man who, though originally endowed with all power, descends into weakness and bondage, and has to win his own freedom and regains his original state. The doctrine is not Egyptian, but seems to have been, in its origin, part and parcel of the Chaldean mystery traditions, and was widely spread in Hellenistic circles. Certainly by around 5,000 years ago, it definitely was making its way into Egypt, but yeah, it goes further back in Babylon as we see. But Luciferian is not necessarily satanic. Luciferian is that a person brings out the light. A person announces a light. It doesn't mean you can't have a religion, because you're obviously you're calling towards something. But it means that you're bringing out your own sense of this knowledge. You're bringing out your own experience and practice of this knowledge. You can certainly see and act, believe and act, and express that very strictly according to Scripture, but it has to be your own hero deeds that save yourself accordingly. The enlightenment process, not just mimicking. I didn't articulate that as well, but this isn't quite the place to. Thus, in introductory remarks, prefaced by Hippolytus, to the document he is quoting, asserts that the Naassenes honor as the logos of all universals man and son of man, and they divide him into three, for they say he has a mental, psychic, and coic aspect, and they think that the gnosis of this man is the beginning of the possibility of knowing God, saying the beginning of perfection is the gnosis of man, but the gnosis of God is perfected perfection. All these mental, psychic, and earthly descended together into one man, Jesus, the Son of Mary. Thus, the myth of man, the mystery of generation, is the subject matter of the document in question, and this myth is set forth with reference to all mysteries, beginning with the Assyrian. Now, when you deal with myth, if it's not literally true, it turns out to be true in another way. So, it's not that fable is something different than a myth. A fable is just a deliberate set of lies, and sometimes it can be presented as a myth, but a myth has meaning and purpose. Take up the cross and follow him, as the Bible would say. Paragraph 5 runs, now the Assyrians call this mystery Adonis, and whenever it is called Adonis, it is Aphrodite, who is in love with and desires soul, so-called, and Aphrodite is Genesis, according to them. But in the next section, the writer jumps from the Assyrian to the Phrygian mysteries, saying, but if the mother of the gods emasculates Attis, she too, regarding him as the object of her love, it is the blessed nature above the supercosmic and ionic spaces. Grumbling fiercely, which calls back the masculine power of soul to herself. In a note to this, Mr. Meade quotes from the life of Isidoros. I fell asleep, and in a vision, Attis seemed to appear to me, and on behalf of the mother of the entities, to initiate me into the feast called Hilario, a mystery which discloses the way of our salvation from Hades. Throughout the document, reference is continually made to the Phrygians and the doctrine of man. The Eleusinian mysteries are then treated as subsequent to the Phrygian, after the Phrygians, the Athenians, but the teaching is represented as being essentially identical. We have then a passage of great interest for our investigation, in which the mysteries are sharply divided into two classes, and their separate content clearly defined. There are the little mysteries, those of the fleshly generation, and after men have been initiated into them, they should cease for a while and become initiated in a great heavenly mysteries. For this is the gate of heaven, and this is the house of God, where the good God dwells alone, into which the house no impure man shall come. Hippolytus remarks that these Naassenes, two S's, Naassenes, say that the performers in theaters, they too, neither say or do anything without design. For example, when the people assemble in the theater, and a man comes on the stage clad in a robe different from all others, with lute in hand on which he plays, and thus chants the great mysteries, not knowing what he says, whether blessed, child of Cronus, or of Zeus, or of great Rhea, hail Attis, thou mournful song of Rhea. Assyrians call thee thrice longed for Adonis. All Egypt calls thee Osiris. The wisdom of Hellas names thee men's heavenly horn. The Samothracians call thee august Adama. The Hamanians Corybas or Corybas. Anyway, the Phrygians name thee Papa sometimes. At times, again, dead, are God, are unfruitful, are Apollos, are green reaped wheat ear, are the fruitful amygdalus brought forth, man, piper, Attis. This is the Attis of many forms, of whom they sing as follows. The candidate was presumed to have gone through some symbolic rite of death and resurrection. Of Attis I will sing, of Rhea's beloved, not with the becoming of bells, nor with the deep-toned pipe of Idaan Curetus, but I will blend my song with Phoebus, is music of the lyre. Evoi Ivan, for thou art Pan, thou Bacchus art, and shepherd of bright stars. I would draw special attention to the passage in view of the present controversy as to the origin of drama. It looks as if the original writer of the document and the section is in the so-called pagan source would have inclined to the views of Sir Gilbert Murray, Miss Harrison, and Mr. Cornford, rather than to those championed by their sarcastic critic, Sir W. Ridgway. On this, Hippolytus comments, for these and such like reasons, the Naassenes frequently what are called the mysteries of the Great Mother, believing that they obtained the clearest view of the universal mystery from the things done in them, and after all this evidence of elaborate syncretism, this practical identification of all the mystery entities with the vegetation deity. Calm down, stomach, you will get vegetation soon. Adonis Attis, we are confronted in the concluding paragraph, after stating that the true gate is Jesus the Blessed, Jesus is Islu is oh thou. It's sort of a second form, kind of second person form, but yeah. With this astounding claim from the men of the latest redactor, and of all men, we alone are Christians, accomplishing the mystery of the third gate. Remember the spears in that Book of the Dead painting? Ding, ding, ding. So, consumption, sexual, social, ding. So if none of these are a problem, that's, lower rate of success, right? Or the third heaven, as the writing of Paul speaks of. Now, what conclusions are to be drawn for this document, which, in its entirety, Mr. Mead regards as the most important source we have for the higher side regeneration of the Hellenistic mysteries? Actually, there's sources sort of contemporary with the Catholic Church founding that kind of indicate some things, but first of all, does it not provide a complete and overwhelming justification of those scholars who have insisted upon the importance of these vegetation cults, a justification of which, from the very nature of their studies, they could not have been aware? Sir James Fraser and those who followed him have dealt with the public side of the cult, with its importance as a recognized vehicle for obtaining material advantages. It was the social rather than the individual aspect which appealed to them. Now we find that in the immediate pre- and post-Christian era, these cults were considered not only most potent factors for assuring material prosperity of land and folk, but were also held to be the most appropriate vehicle for imparting the highest religious teaching. The vegetation entities, Adonis, Attis, and more especially the Phrygian entity, were the chosen guides to the knowledge of and union with the supreme spiritual source of life, of which they were the communicating medium. Hence some of what's attached to the Holy Grail, right? We must remember that though the document before us is, in its actual form, the expression of faith of a discredited Christian Gnostic sect, the essential groundwork upon which it is elaborated belongs to a period anterior to Christianity, and that the ode in honor of Attis, quoted above, not only forms part of the original source, but is, in the opinion of competent critics, earlier than the source itself. I would also recall to the memory of the reader the passage previously quoted from Comte, in which he refers to the use made by the Neoplatonist philosophers of the Attis legend as the mold into which they poured their special theories and of the universe and of generation. Can the importance of a cult capable of so far-reaching developments be easily exaggerated? Secondly, and of more immediate importance for our investigation, it is not evident that we have here all elements necessary for a mystical development of the Grail tradition. The exoteric side of the cult gives us the folklore elements, the suffering king, the wasteland, the effect upon the folk, the text that lies before the hero, a group of Grail symbols. The esoteric side provides us with the mystic meal, the food of life, connected in some mysterious way with a vessel which is the center of the cult. The combination of that vessel with a weapon, a combination bearing a well-known generative significance, a double initiation of the source of the lower and higher spheres of life, the ultimate proof of the successful issue of the final test in the restoration of the king. I would ask any honest-minded critic whether any of the numerous theories previously advanced has shown itself capable of furnishing so comprehensive a solution of the ensemble problem. At the same time, it should be pointed out that the acceptance of this theory of the origin of the story is in no way excludes the possibility of the introduction of other elements during the period of romantic evolution. As I have previously stated, not all of those who handle the theme know the real character of the material with which they were dealing, while even among those who did know, there were some who allowed themselves considerable latitude in their methods of composition, who did not scruple to introduce elements foreign to the original stuff, but which would make an appeal to the public of the day. And thus, while Blaheris, who, I believe, really held a tradition of the original cult, contented himself with the practically simple recital of the initiations, later redactors, under the influence of the Crusades, and the Longinus legend, possibly also actuated by a desire to substitute a more edifying explanation than that originally offered, added a directly Christian interpretation of the lance. As it is concerning the lance alone that Gawain asks, the first modification must have been at this point, the bringing into the line of the twin symbol. The vase would come later. The fellowship, it may even be the rivalry between the two great Benedictine houses of Fescamp and Glastonbury, led to the redaction, in the interest of the latter, of a Saint Song legend parallel to that which was the genuine possession of the French house. For we must emphasize the fact that the original Joseph Glastonbury story is a Saint Song and not a Grail legend. A phial containing the blood of our Lord was said to have been buried in the tomb of Joseph, surely a curious fate for so precious a relic, and the abbey never laid claim to the possession of the vessel of the Last Supper. Had it done so, it would certainly have become a noted center of pilgrimage. As Dr. Brugger acutely remarks, such relics are visited, not sought after. But there is reason to believe that the kindred abbey of Fescamp had developed its genuine Saint Song legend into a Grail romance, and there is critical evidence to lead us to suppose that the text we know as Perlisvaus was, in its original form, now it is to be feared practically impossible to reconstruct, connected with that abbey as we have it. This alone of all Grail romances connects the hero alike with Nicodemus and with Joseph of Arimathea, the respective protagonists of the Saint Song legends, while its assertion that the original Latin text was found in a holy house situated in the marshes, the burial place of Arthur and Guinevere, unmistakably points to Glastonbury. In any case, when Robert de Baron proposed to himself the task of composing a trilogy on the subject of the Joseph legend was already in a developed form and a fresh element. The combination of the Grail legend with the story of a highly popular folktale hero, known in this connection as Percival, though he has had many names, was established. Baron was certainly aware of the real character of his material. He knew the Grail cult was as Christianized mystery, and, while following the romance development, handled the theme on distinctively religious lines, preserving the mystery element in its threefold development, and equating the vessel of the mystic feast with the Christian Eucharist. From what we now know of the material, it seems certain that the equation was already established, and that Baron was simply stating in terms of romance what was already known to him in terms of mystery. In face of the evidence above set forth, there can no longer be any doubt that the mystic feast of the nature cults really had, and that at a very early date, been brought into touch with the sacrament of the Eucharist. But the Chrétien de Troyes, the story was romance, pure and simple. There was still a certain element of awe connected with the Grail and Grail feast, but of the real meaning and origin of the incidents he had, I am convinced, no idea whatever. Probably many modifications were already in his source, but the result so far as his poem is concerned is that he duplicated the character of the Fisher King, he separated both father and son from the wasted land, transferring the responsibility of the woes of the land and folk to the quester, who, although his failure might be responsible for their continuance, never had anything to do with their origin. He bestowed the wound of the Grail King, deeply significant in its original conception and connection, upon Perceval's father, a shadowy character entirely apart from the Grail tradition. There is no trace of the initiation elements in his poem, no perilous chapel, no welding of the sword. We have here passed completely and entirely into the land of romance. The doors of the temple are closed behind us. It is the story of Perceval Lee Galois, not the ritual of the Grail, which fills the stage. And with the story of Perceval, there comes upon the scene a crowd of folk tale themes, obviously foreign to the Grail itself.